Hey everyone, Cynthia from One Day Woman. So I'm understanding that with COVID-19, a lot of people decided to get digging in the dirt and make a garden. And I think that's a great idea. So it inspired me to make a video about my garden, to give you a little tour of my garden, and to talk to you about 3 big mistakes I made in establishing this garden, and also 3 successes. So my first really big mistake is that I didn't have a plan, a master plan. When I bought this property a little over 15 years ago, I was just so excited to get a garden underway. I had been gardening for many years prior to that, just small gardens with raised beds. So raised beds was what I knew, and I just thought I'd slap down some raised bed and get started. The logical place seemed to be where the yard ended and then the field started. So I put in 3 boxes just to start with. The problem was that, of course, as you get into gardening, you want to do more, grow more, and I needed more boxes, more space. So obviously it was an okay location because I have plenty of field behind me, but I just kept cobbling bits together without any master plan. And in the end, it caused me some problems. For example, after my initial 3 boxes, I put in 4 more behind them, and that was okay. They were all lined up, nice wide aisles for the wheelbarrow. But in the next year, I don't know, it was so long ago, I can't remember exactly what I was thinking, but I know that I thought the garden would end there. So I put a box going long ways and one that was a weird shape. I don't know, maybe we got some free lumber or something. But it impedes the progression of the wheelbarrow through the garden. Also, hauling the hose around is difficult because I have these peculiar shaped boxes. So, and as I went, I chunked out certain areas every spring. I was working at the time, and every spring, and every spring, garden. Every spring I'd have just a little time to do a little bit more, a little bit bigger expansion, but without a master plan to guide me, it was really cobbled together. It's actually this spring, some 15, 16 years later, that I finally got things organized how I kind of want them. So my advice is, even if you start really small, and I think you should start small, especially if you're a beginning gardener, if you work full time, you have limited time, start small, but plan for getting bigger if you have the property. The next big mistake I made was I didn't consider these trees that are shading me right now. They were here on the property. It's 2 English walnuts, and I had no idea how big they would get. And as you can see behind me, they are shading. It's, I don't know, 10:30 in the morning, 11, and this time of year, it's the end of August, they are shading my front 3 boxes at this hour in the morning, which isn't good. So they either have to come down or these boxes need to get moved. So my tip would be to be sure to consider the trees that are growing on the property, and also buildings, because you can get out there in the spring and say, I'm going to put my boxes right here, not realizing that later in the fall there's going to be a building that's shading your boxes. So consider buildings and trees, how big they might get over the years. So my third mistake actually occurred just this year, and I didn't foresee it, so that's why I want to share it with you. And that is, I did not plan for any kind of fencing in my garden. We have a 10-acre farm that's in the middle of really wide open spaces. We have some woods over there and some woods well over there. We've always had dogs on the property, although over the past 5 years they've always been in a separate caged area. We haven't gotten deer, we don't get rabbits, nothing else that really bothers the garden until this year. All of a sudden rabbits moved in. I've got a 13-stripe squirrel that lives in my garden, and we just kind of deal with each other because I don't want to hurt it. But the rabbits were a real problem, so I had to get some fencing, and I would have loved to have had a nice beautiful fence all the way around, but we didn't have time. The garden was in, the rabbits were eating, so we had to get some wire. And I think because everybody is home gardening these days with COVID-19, and they're also making chicken coops, I couldn't find any chicken wire anywhere. I did find at a home a building supply, a small building supply company in our area, two rolls of chicken wire, which would not probably have been my choice, and some stakes. And so we very quickly put up this fencing. But it's hard. It's been hard to maintain the border. A lot of grasses and weeds grow through. It's hard to weed whack. I think it looks awful. I trip on it every day. And so I think that in the big scheme of your plan, you might want to think about fencing. Try to pay attention to what kind of critters live in your area, and be prepared for critters to move in someday, because again, it was unexpected that we had any critters. Your neighbor maybe doesn't have a cat or a dog now, but they could in the future, and they also can cause problems in the garden. So those are my 3 mistakes. Let's move on to successes. So I think the most important thing that somehow, again, it really wasn't a plan, but it ended up being a success, is that right behind me I have a water source in the garden. I think that your water source should either be in the garden or really, really close. This water comes from a place about maybe 20 yards away. No, I don't think it's that far. A place that's pretty close by, and I could have run a hose, but I just think that running back and forth to a water source is going to drive you crazy in the long term of your garden. And so my water source is right there, and I just love it. So that's my first success. My second success was I started with raised beds. I think that if you're just starting out with gardening, raised beds is the way to go. Maybe I'll make a video about my experiences with raised bed in the future. When I had my very first garden some 30 years ago, my brother actually gave me a book called Square Foot Gardening, and that's what got me started with the boxes, with the raised beds. And I'm telling you, it's a very simple way to garden. It saved my gardening arse. So thank you, brother, for that. And I continue to have boxes, but that's my number 2 success, is I started with raised beds. So my third success is that in the end, I ended up with a nice rectangular shaped garden. Building off of the whole grid system of the raised beds, my garden is sort of laid out like a grid. But I have areas in the back that are not beds. I think that there's some things that I have found over the years I think grow a little bit better in just ground level in the dirt. And so I have area in the back for those kinds of crops. In the way that that the big rectangle works also is for maximum flexibility. Of course, with the boxes, you're not as flexible. You can rotate crops, but I can plant something on that end of the garden this year, and because I have removable fences for growing things up, cages and wires and stuff, I can move that crop to the other side of the garden. So in the end, I think I've created a garden. Took a long time, but in the end, I have a garden that has maximum flexibility. So that's my third success. I hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit about my garden today. I hope you'll share any questions or comments about your garden below. Thanks for joining me today. I'm Cynthia from One Day Woman. Don't forget to subscribe and like. See ya.